How's it going, everybody? Welcome into the Skyline Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Jack Hartman, joined as always by my good friend and my co-host on the West Coast, Nick Normand. Nick, how you doing today?
Doing well. Not so much on the West Coast today as much as the west side of the U.S. I'm in Vegas today at the Pizza Expo. Got to rep the brand for some pizza today, man. But doing well out in the desert, having a good time, getting some good food, going to the expo, going to some cool shows. But doing well, man. How are you doing today
Nice.
in that Texas outfit?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Celebrating opening day of the Major League Baseball season, repping the Texas Rangers, and yeah, excited for the start of a new Major League Baseball season. But yeah, doing well. Excited to be talking through some NFL stuff today. Talking through the NFC South and West and what this is sort of starting. 4 weeks we'll be going through division by division in both conferences and assessing their draft needs after free agency. Of course, there's still some names that are still out there, but for the most part, the strong wave of free agency is over, and so we need to look at these teams and okay, you addressed this, which is good, but you still have this that you need to take care of. So seems like the draft is the place to do it. And so we're going to be doing that starting in the NFC South with the Atlanta Falcons. Some notable additions to them. They signed Tua Tagovailoa. They signed Brian Robinson Jr., which will make some people have some uh, fantasy draft nightmares when they see B. Robinson Jr. and get so excited that he's available, and thinking it's Bijan, and in reality it's Brian. They put a franchise tag on Kyle Pitts, and yeah, those are really the big ones, to mention with them. So Nick, what as you evaluate this Atlanta Falcons team, what are your biggest thoughts in terms of this is where they need to go in the draft?
So when I look at this roster, one, I think this is a pretty darn good roster overall. Like early in the year, this team had a really good defense. And then like you look at this roster and they've invested so much in the offense. They've obviously invested in Michael Penix Jr., in Bijan Robinson, in Drake London, in Kyle Pitts. Like they've put a lot of high draft capital in the offense, obviously. And so when I look at this roster, I'm like, they got a lot of good offensive players. They've put together a good defense last year. I just kind of look at it as a quarterback issue more than anything. But given what they've invested in the quarterback, I don't think you're drafting a quarterback here. And so I think primarily given where they're drafting at, because they traded away their first round pick to the Rams this year, because of the trade last year that they traded up to get JPJ, I think that probably it's going to be a lot of ancillary moves. And I'd be looking, the one major thing I look at with this roster is Jake Matthews is 34 years old. He has been a stalwart on that offensive line for over a decade. He's been a great player. He's been their left tackle for a generation, and it's been very, very like solid to good football for his entire career. And I think that's awesome. When you're talking about a 34-year-old offensive tackle who's been very, very healthy, thinking about what happens when he retires or when he starts getting injury prone or moves on or whatever that looks like, I think looking into a replacement for him for the long term is going to be important. So I think that that swing tackle slash left tackle replacement for him is very important. And then I just kind of look at best player available on the defense, specifically edge, given the sort of controversy that dropped into James Pierce Jr. last year with the off field issues that he had, where it felt like they addressed edge in such a major way that felt awesome. But they've been starving for edge for a decade. And I think that probably it'd be better to invest in there again, potentially. Even just have a third edge rusher at this point. I think it will be nice for them. But I think they're more of a best player available sort of team, considering the situation they're in, considering quarterbacks kind of their biggest need, but they can't really do anything about it. That's kind of how I look at the Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, I feel like I feel like one thing that I would put in there outside of, best available would be wide receiver. Drake London is great,
Mm,
but behind him you've got Jahan Dotson, who they signed this offseason, and Olamide Zaccheaus.
mhm.
It's not the strongest wide receiver core in the league. And also, like, you can't just rest on your laurels of, well, we have Kyle Pitts, because we have no idea what Kyle Pitts you actually have week in and week out. So I think I would like to see Atlanta attack wide receiver. Um, in the draft in day one or day two. Day two, I think, would be fine because, again, there's just such a deep wide receiver class this year. My thoughts were also,
Mhm.
you mentioned left tackle in particular. I just think offensive line in general. Right now, your quarterbacks are Michael Penix Jr. and Tua Tagovailoa, both guys that have had some injury issues and injury history. You want to be able to keep those guys upright, and so you can always get better at the offensive line. Um, like, plus, like you said, Jake Matthews is getting old. Matthew Bergeron is still young and is doing great. Ryan Newsill, Chris Lidstrom, and Caleb McGarry. Like, I think you can get better at a lot of those spots. Um, and then the other thing that I put was corner. When I look at these corners, AJ Terrell, he's solid but not great. Mike Hughes, solid, not great. Billy Bowman Jr. is your nickel. I love their safeties and Xavier Watts and Jesse Bates. So I think for me it's like, okay, you could say edge, you could say corner, sort of, for that defensive spot. That's like, hey, where do we kind of look? But I sort of leaned corner.
I get you there. Moving on to the Saints, I looked at the Saints roster for a while, and I was actually more impressed than I thought I would be, specifically with the offensive line and how they've invested there with Talisi Fuaga, with the offensive tackle from Texas last year. I just really kind of like what they've done, kind of building up the trenches, drafting Tyler Shuck last year and getting him for a good value in the second round. Like, I feel like they really overachieved last year for what I thought they could be, but I think that they overachieved in a way that proves more sustainability rather than fluke. Where to
Mm,
me, I look at the Saints team and I feel like their floor is much higher than I thought it was. Where if you get solid to good quarterback play out of Shuck with a good offensive line, with ETN now as a good running back for you and a good pass catcher, and Olave playing well, like I feel like this is a better team than I expected them to be. And I just think that they've kind of held a lot of the pieces together on defense where they can improve there for sure. But I just thought this was a sinking ship that was going to implode, and they did not implode this year in a way that I thought they would. Firstly, I would say wide receiver two, massive need. Behind Olave, Devon Vele gave them good snaps this last year, but he's not who you want your wide receiver two to be. And also, your wide receiver three and deeper are all like worse than Jags. Like they're just people at this point. I think Vele as your three or four is really solid, and I think that spacing of having better fits at each wide receiver position will be awesome. I think that edge with the departure of Cam Jordan is a really critical spot, especially because I feel like they've drafted a lot of defensive line. They drafted edge maybe 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. Most of those guys are gone. But right now at edge, you're expecting Chase Young to burden a pretty heavy load. And he's a very inconsistent dude, especially at this point in his career. So I'd lean edge on defense and I'd lean cornerback slash DB, where I think basically the best available DB would really improve this room that's had dudes who I think have played better than you would think they would, but nobody who's played great outside of Marshawn Lattimore for the better part of a half decade at this point, where I think just any great DB would be an awesome pickup for them.
yeah, I have a lot of similar stuff. Wide receiver was definitely top of the list for me. Um, when they traded Rashid Shaheed, last year to Seattle, and I think that doing that showed that they were prepared to draft a wide receiver high in this year's draft. I also mentioned offensive line, and this is not a need that I feel like they need to address in days 1 and 2, but when you're drafting your 5th, 6th, 7th round guys, I just look at their depth chart right now, and I feel like they need bodies. If you look at their depth chart, they don't have a tackle behind Kelvin Banks Jr. for left tackle. They have a few guys that are slotted in right tackle, but if you get a true left tackle, yeah, maybe not a top of the line left tackle, but a true experienced left tackle in the 7th round, do it. Same thing with center. They have nobody on their depth chart right now in center behind Eric McCoy. Again, I'm sure that there are guys, especially they've got quite a few guards on their roster that could slide in there. But if you see, a true center, again, late day 3, go and get them. Get more bodies there, and I would rather see a competition between your second best center and your third best guard for the backup center position than just, oh yeah, well, our third best guard is going to get in there. You know what I mean? Um, so yeah, so I had the line, wide receiver, and then I also had edge. Cameron Jordan, as of right now, is not on the roster, and because of that, yeah, Chase Young very inconsistent. Got to shout out my boy Fadil Diggs out of Syracuse, who's still on the roster there. But again, he's not your he's not he's not your T.J. Watt, your Miles Garrett, your Aiden Hutchinson. So if you can get that level of edge, in the first round, and there's a chance that you can. There are going to be quite a few edges that are available in the first round. How high you grade them is up to you, right? But guys that are sort of consensus will probably be taken in the first round. There are quite a few of those. Um, who knows? You might be in place for Ruben Bain if people don't like his arm length and he kind of falls to the Saints where they're picking. Um, Definitely in sweepstakes for him, and it's a matter of, is there anybody better that you could get there as well. Would not surprise me if the Saints are a team that trades back in the first round this year, just because of what their needs are and where there's depth in this draft at what their needs are, as opposed to tackle, running back, right? They might be a team that trades back, so someone can go get Jeremiah Love if he's still available. Though personally, if I'm the Saints and Jeremiah Love is available, I'm drafting him because I think he kills two birds with one stone. In being, I sort of equate Jeremiah Love to like what we were seeing Samuel in his heyday with the San Francisco, as a guy that you could line up at wide receiver and also a guy that San Francisco was putting in their backfield. That was before they got Christian McCaffrey and they needed more talent carrying the football, and they were doing that with him. But New Orleans, I say wide receiver, offensive line, and edge is where I'm at.
Mhm. Yep, a lot of good picks there for sure. Moving on to the Bucks, I just had two really big positions that I thought would be really critical for them. Their offense played really well early in the season. They looked very explosive. Their defense didn't look great all year. I feel like they let up so many leads late in the season where it felt like they shouldn't have, where that 3rd and 27 or something like that late in the season that got converted into a 4th and something that they converted the 4th down. I believe it was the Panthers game. That was just one of those types of plays that I think shows that you really need to work on getting pressure, especially on opposing quarterbacks. I think edge is the number one need for this team. And I think linebacker, with the departure of their stalwart, like great player in Levante David, linebacker for 15 years, like Levante David and edge rusher, I think are those two spots because Levante David soaked up so many snaps. Your linebackers outside of him and including him didn't play great last year. And I just think that middle of the field presence to be able to build out what should be a better defense than it was last year is going to be really critical. I think that this offense can play really well. I really like their running back depth. I really like their offensive line. I love it when Baker is healthy. I think that maybe you could use a wide receiver 3, maybe a 2, depending on how you feel about Chris Godwin at this age. But I think that's lower than these defensive needs, specifically linebacker and edge for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think that edge is more of a priority to me than linebacker. They did. yes, they lost Levante David. They signed Alex Anzalone this offseason, having seen basically every single one of his games for the last, you know, 5 years. Um, he is very good, and I would feel comfortable having him as your premier linebacker for that defense. Though definitely, you want depth as well, and there are a couple linebackers that seem solid. Um, but that said, I think the edge is certainly the needs to be the top priority. Right now, I mean they signed Al Qadim Muhammad in the offseason. I don't know how good Al Qadim Muhammad actually is. He had lots of sacks, but also it's really easy to have lots of sacks when the opposite pass rusher you is Aiden Hutchinson. So I think he is a good, and I think he's a starting caliber defensive end, but I don't think he's like your bring him in, be your premier edge rusher level defensive end. He's more than welcome to prove me wrong though in Tampa Bay. So I agree with edge and linebacker. Um, from there, it's kind of tough. I kind of look at corner, and could see a world where they could upgrade at corner. I do like their offensive line, but also I feel like it's a place that just for so many of these teams, it's like, can you get better at the offensive line? Probably, like and so maybe a right tackle, wouldn't hate that for them, or also maybe just draft thinking about the future and thinking we've had Tristan Wirfs. Tristan Wirfs is great. How much longer do we have with him? Is there a left tackle that we really really like that we could play at right tackle now, with the idea that once Wirfs moves on, we move him to left tackle? That might be a smart decision for Tampa Bay to make. Moving on to Carolina,
For sure.
let's
For
uh
sure.
let's
And with that, the last team we got to go over in this division, my bad. The lag's kind of kicking our butts a little bit, but go for it with Carolina.
yeah, Carolina. Carolina's the last team we have to talk about in the South, in the NFC South. And Carolina is an interesting team because while they made the playoffs only as an 8-win team, they did give the Rams a run for their money there in that playoff game a little bit. And I feel like that this is a team that has has more structure than I think they've had in a long time. I think this is a Carolina Panthers team that has roster wise has pieces better than they've had probably since they traded Christian McCaffrey. Um, that's like, okay, I can see the vision here. I can see what you're building around here. So that said, looking at it, I think that tight end is a big need for them. Their top tight end is Jatavion Sanders. They also have Tommy Tremble, Mitchell Evans, and Felipe Franks, former quarterback Felipe Franks. So like that tight end room is just not good. And I think we're seeing now more than ever the use of tight ends in the passing game. I mean, we've seen it a lot. You look at Travis Kelce and George Kittle have been doing it for a while, but Sam Laporta, the Bills have Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. Like the tight end is just it is a useful asset, and they just have a lot of nobodies at tight end right now. So I think that that would be a really good place for them. Who knows? Maybe they're kind of in the Kenyon Sadiq uh, range in the first round. They, maybe go there with that. Who knows? I also would like to see them improve on the offensive line. Again, I'm going to keep saying it. It's easy to say that about all of these NFC South teams because all of them are teams that, again, the winner of the NFC South last year went 8-9 in the Carolina Panthers, right? So like, if you're having a losing record, your offensive line is probably not the thing that you are not blaming at all, and it's everything else. But specifically with them, that right tackle position, I think they could improve there. Right now, it's Taylor Moton, and that's the only guy they have on their depth chart in the right tackle position. They have Ike Ekwanu in left tackle. He's been kind of hit or miss, not as great as I think we all thought he was going to be coming out. He's been enough, but not perfect. And so that might be a place as well that you could see getting better just at the tackle position.
And then lastly, I put safety. They've got J.C. Horn at corner right now, so I feel decent enough about their corners, but their safeties, I feel like they could get better. Who knows? Maybe they're not in the Sadiq draft range, but they look and consider maybe some of the safeties that we have, because we have quite a few safeties that could be coming out in the first round this year between uh, um, Caleb Caleb Love, no, Caleb Downs. Good grief, Caleb Downs out of Ohio State, and as well as the kid out of Oregon and the kid out of Toledo. They might take a swing on one of those safeties.
For sure, for sure. Lots of good players at safety this year. That's for darn sure. I have a lot of similar notes to what you got, Jack. I think specifically offensive tackle for this line, where I look at this and the center position or the interior positions on the O line, I think are pretty good. I think that the offensive tackle position, though, Moton's getting older. Aquanu got injured. He screwed up his knee really bad late in the season. And they did sign Rasheed Walker on a 1 year deal, which I think was a really good deal for them to get him on the 1 year deal. I think that because you have old, injured, and 1 year deal, you can feel good about drafting an offensive tackle if you want to, just considering all the uncertainty there. I think that wide receiver two slash like a different sort of wide receiver, because T Mac's your wide receiver one. McMillan was really good as a rookie. Really big, strong hand catcher, great hands, runs pretty good routes for a big dude. Impressive player. And the dude out of Holy Cross, Jalen Coker, he's been good for you guys and getting you guys some really good catches out here and really big size receiver as well. But considering you have big receiver, some tight ends, I think having some twitchier dudes when Leggette's been a no show, that it just feels like you need a speed or a route runner kind of receiver specifically for the slot. Or if you want an inside outside dude and you want to run T Mac in the slot on occasion as power slot. I think either of those things will be great options for them. And I also just kind of look at the defense, as you said, where I think that the defense, they've added some better players recently. Of course, with Derek Brown at defensive tackle, he's been really good for them since he got drafted. And last year, drafting Nick Squirton, he played pretty darn well. I just feel, though, that another defensive tackle, another edge, a linebacker, like you can just throw basically any position out of the front on the defense between like I think just front seven sort of player or safety, as you said, that any of those positions. I think corner is probably their best position on defense outside of
Agreed.
Derek Brown. And I would say though that outside of those spots that you could just go best player available on the defense as well, probably, and feel really good about that. I think tight end's a solid shout, but I think that considering the tight ends that are going to be there, potentially if Sadiq goes before that, you're not drafting one of the other tight ends. Like there's not another first round tight end that's going to go that part of the first round for sure.
Right.
So I think that right now I definitely look at tackle and then just defensive sort of player there in the front. But I like all the shots that you gave there for sure.
Cool. Well, let's move on to the NFC West, starting with the Arizona Cardinals. The Arizona Cardinals, my top thing for them, and it's tough because I think it is the biggest need that they have, but they're not in a place that I would go after any of the people that are available, and that's quarterback. They're not going to be drafting Fernando Mendoza. I Dan Orlovsky this week said some wild things about Ty Simpson, and I just don't agree with him. I don't see him saying that Ty Simpson is better than Fernando Mendoza and that he would take Simpson over Mendoza. I disagree. And frankly, I think that Ty Simpson is the type of guy that needs to end up in the perfect place for him to be successful, and that's not Arizona. Plus, Arizona's drafting with pick number 3, and I certainly would not take him with pick number 3. So that said, I don't think they address quarterback. Maybe they take a flyer on like a Diego Pavia on day 2 or something like that. But like I would be surprised if they don't draft some quarterback just to see. give him some, like draft him and then do maybe what a lot of Steelers fans wanted the Steelers to do with Will Howard last year. Like, hey, you know what, you got him, give him a shot. And so they might do something like that. But so outside of quarterback, I would say for them, I'm looking at tackle. They have Parents Johnson Jr. as their left tackle right now. Their right tackle, they've got Elijah Wilkinson. They're just offensive line, I think needs addressed, and so maybe they do draft like a CC Maui Noah, and hey, if he's your right tackle, great. If not, you can move him in and play guard. That works too. At the same time, though, do I want to use my third overall pick on a guy that's like maybe you're good enough to be tackle, but you're certainly good enough to be guard? Because if it pays off and he is good enough to be tackle, then fine. If it doesn't, no one's using the third overall pick on a guard. So like that's sort of the balancing act that they sort of need to work through there. And then I also look at edge. I know they brought in Josh Sweat. But outside of that, I kind of look at their defense. I like a lot of the pieces on their defense. I like Will Johnson. I like Buda Baker. I like Garrett Williams and Denzel Burke. I really like the backside of this defense. I think they've got a great secondary. Maybe not great secondary, a very underrated secondary that I think can be very competitive if you've got a front seven that can get to the quarterback and get the guy on the ground. Which you have to do in this NFC West. There's so many good receivers that you can have the best you can have the best corner on him, unless it's prime Darrelle Revis, unless like you need to be able to get to the quarterback to help him out. So I would address edge.
For sure. I agree with all the points that you gave. Literally, like if I showed you my list, it was quarterback, it was offensive line, and it was edge. Like we're in lockstep with this. Specifically, I pointed out the right side of the offensive line more than the left. I just think that Paris Johnson is your left tackle. Isaac Sumalo is your left guard, and he's a pretty darn good player. He is older. The Steelers did not want to, I don't know that they didn't want to re-sign him, but he's a good player that I think can definitely play for a year or two and play good football for you. But I specifically think the right side of the offensive line is more replaceable than the left, even though it's all up in the air with the Arizona Cardinals offensive line. As you said, Josh Sweat, there were reports that he wanted out of Arizona. What is the plan for them at quarterback? I really don't know, because I think they could be like last year we heard like, oh yeah, the Saints, are they going to want to be in that tank for Arch kind of team? And then Arch didn't come out this year, but they drafted Tyler Shuck in the second round last year. Would Arizona draft a quarterback in the second round this year or trade back into the first this year and do that? Or are they waiting for Arch or another player next year? I think that either way we could see that. But right now, like Ty Simpson, if he was available at 28, I think if you're Arizona in the second, like I think it makes sense to trade up for him. And I think that the way that things are being reported right now with Ty Simpson came out when he only had 1 year starting at Alabama this last year. And I don't know that he would come out with only 1 year of experience unless he got first round grades from people or from his agent. And so I think that there are first round grades on him out there. I do think he likely goes in the first round. I think like the Jackson Dart sort of range is very much on the table for him, whether it's the Steelers trading back or trading in again to the first round, whether it's a team like the Cardinals or a team like the Jets trading back into the first round or 16 trading back. I think there are a variety of ways that we get Ty Simpson in the back half of the first round, and that's probably what happens. But I think Arizona would be a pretty darn good landing spot for him, considering all the circumstances. Like, do I feel like if they drafted at 3 or traded back from 3 a little bit and drafted Francis Mauigoa, and then they traded back into the first or did something like that to get Ty Simpson, do I feel like I could feel like how I do about the Saints right now with Shuck about the Cardinals next year? Pretty good. about this Cardinals team. I do think that that's on the table, and I do think that that will be a good plan if I'm the Arizona Cardinals. But I don't know that they're going to do that. I don't think they're particularly well run, so we don't really know. But those are my
Yeah.
thoughts on the Cardinals and what they're doing. So.
Yep. Yeah. No, totally. So we're in pretty solid alignment there. Let's move on to the Los Angeles Rams. And the Rams are in a weird place because they're trying to play for now, but also the talk for the last like 2 years, this will be like year 3, is like, but also do we draft a quarterback as Matthew Stafford's replacement? And my thought is, if you're going to commit, you got to be all in, and that includes the way you use your draft capital. Again, you're not going to get Mendoza. Maybe you get Simpson, but like probably not. So like don't touch quarterback again. Yeah, sure. At day 3, there's a quarterback out of who knows, Eastern Michigan, right? That you like or whatever. Like what are those guys that we can't really name, but might fit that category. Yeah, take a flyer on that guy, but otherwise, like, don't be using a premier draft pick at the quarterback position. So with the Rams, they have a really good roster. Like, they have a really good roster in terms of competing right now. And so I feel like the thing to do is to kind of look to the future. Like, okay, how can we draft? What are the positions that it's like, hey, let's draft our next guy, right? So we can have somebody in waiting, right? And so with that, I kind of look at the tackle position for them. Um, I know they just traded for Trent McDuffie, but I kind of look at corner. Um, they're a really good football team. Like they like I don't really look at this roster and think like, oh, here's a gap, right? And there are really good football teams who do have gaps. When we get to the NFC North and we talk about the Lions, I think they're a really good football team, but they have some really big holes that they have to fill in the draft. This is a really good football team that I'm like, I don't see it. I don't see the like, oh, well, here was the major loss that they had also, Like they're really good. I think they really are a best available. Maybe they look at their roster and they think, hey, you know what? Devontae Adams is old. Let's address wide receiver because we're not going to have him for much longer, and we can, plan for the future a little bit there. But like I really, really like this team. And the more I look at their roster, the more I'm like, dang, this is a good football team.
I am muted. Yep, I agree with you a lot with that. I think that this is a really, really good roster. I think they are going all in with Matthew Stafford. I think that the reports out about Devontae Adams potentially being traded or being on the trade block, and that they're a team that's in on AJ Brown, I think that that's really interesting. I just think that Devontae Adams and Matt Stafford play pretty darn well together, and even though the money for Devontae Adams is pretty high, that I don't know that I would want to do that. But Devontae Adams, I think whether you're replacing him or getting a wide receiver 3, I think either way, wide receiver could be a really good fit for this team. I think that if you look at their depth chart, it's Devontae Adams, Puka, and like replacement level dudes, where it's dudes like, what is it, Noah Whittington or Jordan Whittington? It's one of the Whittingtons. And like he's a fine player who can make catches, but it's like you're a dude who I'd expect to maybe get 10 to 15 catches this year. Like they don't have dudes who you can bank on 4, 5, 6, 700 yards from that wide receiver 3 or 4 position. They do run a lot of 13 personnel, so they do rock with a lot of tight ends. But I think that they were probably rocking with a lot of tight ends because they didn't have the wide receiver depth to where you'd want to rock out with 11 personnel or 12 personnel. Well, 12 personnel, you'd still just need the 2 receivers. But either way, I think that it will be really valuable for them to get a third really good wide receiver. I also think this could be a Kenyon Sadiq team where I think that if you had him in with your 13 personnel, he's basically another receiver and an amazing weapon that you could use for screen plays, end arounds, lots of designed plays. So I think that would be really fun in this McVay offense. I think that cornerback 2/3, depending on how you feel about Jalen Watson, because I think McDuffie's best in the slot, Watson at one of the outside corners. If you could get another outside specific corner, because I think that you have so many good nickel and slot players right now, but not another outside player. McDuffie's solid on the outside to good, but he's great as a slot corner. So you want to keep him where he's great. So I think that outside corner for them would be good. I think receiver, considering what I was saying. I think offensive line, as you were saying, at offensive tackle, you can always upgrade. And I think another nose tackle or space eater type of defensive tackle. I don't think in the first round, but specifically, I think that this roster has Poona Ford and a lot of pass rushing defensive tackles. But pass rushing defensive tackles are really good at pass rushing. And you kind of want dudes like a Reader who just left the Lions, who was on the Texans and the Bengals, who like DJ Reader could just eat up 2 blocks every single time. And your run defense was always going to be really good because you had a really big, just giant who's going to be able to eat up those players. And so I think that a really big, really strong, really thick defensive tackle would really be awesome to be able to get more one-on-ones for your outside rushers, especially, or just a player to help lock down that run when you're wanting to play nickel because you have so many good DBs. And so I think that this team, it's a lot of ancillary, a lot of second and third string, but really valuable types of players that they need. But they also have a bunch of really good players as well. I also think running back, like people like Kyron Williams, I'm not as big of a Kyron Williams fan. Like he just doesn't seem like a very efficient or explosive in the long run kind of running back. Or I think that if Jeremiah Love was there at 13, like I would run the card up and this offense would be insane, I think. Like I think that will be an amazing player to go all in with. And so I think that that would be great, even though I don't think that's a position of need. I think that that will be like the cherry on top sort of player that makes this Rams team certified. So I think that's just another great player to shout out, even though it's not a need for the roster. But that's what's up with the Rams.
For sure. Let's move on to San Francisco. The 49ers, they were I always look at them as kind of like the mirror opposite of Carolina. And that like Carolina was like record not a good team, roster meh, but made the playoffs and had some good wins. San Francisco was record really good team, roster meh, and kind of surprising to me how well they did. Like it was sort of weird that way, for me. And so I look at this team, and I feel like what I see out of San Francisco is a team that 3 years ago, when they made the playoff or when they made the Super Bowl, was a great team, right? They have a lot of the same pieces that are now 3 years older and are not as good as they once were. And it's hard to I think they just need to really like look inward and just say, hey, you know what? We have some guys that have meant so much to this franchise, and they were really good. But is that where they're at right now? And the answer is no. And we gotta get better. Um, so I look at this team. Having said all that, I look at this team. I look at tight end. George Kittle is getting up there. Lots of injuries. I think it would be wise for them to invest in a tight end, maybe in the second round, the kid out of Vanderbilt. I think that would be a really good pick for them, and would be able to maybe learn for a year or two under George Kittle, but similar body type and similar style that could step into that once Kittle is done. I look at left tackle. There was talks last year about, hey, maybe they draft the tackle out of Ohio State who messed up his knee and give him a year and he can learn under Trent Williams. They didn't do that, but Trent Williams is so old, man. I mean, it's incredible how good he is for how old he is, but he is so old. And so I think if there's a tackle that looks really good, really promising, like to take that chance, would be wise for them. And then I look at wide receiver, and if you look at their wide receiver room right now, they just paid Mike Evans. I love Mike Evans. I think he's one of, if not the most underrated wide receiver of all time. But he's a guy known for his tissue issues. And you brought him to San Francisco, where all of these guys have these tissue issues because they're next to this whatever power plant type thing. Ricky Pearsall, I think, can be really good, but I think the best he is a top wide receiver 2 in the league. I don't view him as a potential wide receiver 1 in the NFL, not right now. And you brought in Christian Kirk, who's kind of just bounced around everywhere and been wide receiver 3 everywhere. And it's like some studs at wide receiver in this draft class. I know I keep saying it, but it's true. Like, there's some really, really talented wide receivers in this draft class. Go get one. Like, yes, you're not going to get a Julio Jones or a Calvin Johnson, but you could get a true, legitimate wide receiver 1 in this draft class on day 2 even. And so that's what I've got for them. I think those are three positions that it's like, okay, if you had a really large gap, a really large need, okay, address that before you address these 3. However, I look at it, I don't see the massive gap or need for San Francisco, but I do see these places that it's like you can upgrade, and you shouldn't be keeping yourself from upgrading because these guys have meant so much to your franchise for so long. It's time to transition them out, I think.
Yep, you make a lot of good points that I agree with. My notes very similar. Left tackle, of course, Trent Williams, very old. Left guard, I think you can upgrade there as well. So I think if you could get somebody who's a flexible guard tackle prospect, or if you add somebody who you play him at guard this year, Trent Williams teaches him the ropes, moves over to left tackle eventually. I think that would be a great sort of plan for an offensive line prospect for them. I wrote healthy pass catcher just simply because like this roster is devoid of healthy pass catchers. Where even a dude like Mike Evans, who is like famous for like 1,000 yard seasons for a decade straight. Like Mike Evans, insanely impressive for that, but he got injured this last year. That's why his streak was broken. Pearsall, obviously, injury issues. Ayuk's not cut from this team, but he's had injury issues, and nobody thinks he's going to be on this team. And George Kittle got injured and is older. Like McCaffrey, pass catcher, sort of out of the backfield. He's obviously been very injured throughout his career. I just think that if there is a team to draft Jordan Tyson, the 49ers should be the farthest away from that. Because if you have a team like the 49ers who everybody gets injured and you have a wide receiver who always gets injured, you know what you shouldn't do? Sandwich them together. And so I think that if you're a team like the 49ers, I think a dude like Carnell Tate, Omar Cooper, or Makai Lemon, like a healthier wide receiver, like I just wouldn't make a gamble on a non-healthy sort of player if I'm a team like the 49ers. I just kind of looking at this defense, I actually like the personnel on this defense. It's literally just injury issues where last year, like everybody got injured on both sides of the ball. But specifically the defense, I'm like, Bosa's good. Dre Greenlaw's back. Fred Warner's great. Like Renardo Green, I like. Malik Mustafa's been solid. Like, I just feel like they have a lot of dudes who are like solid to good to great. But because they were so injured last year, and they have been throughout like the years as 49ers, like it feels like this defense is terrible, but it's just they were terribly injured. And so I think that basically just like adding to this defense, trying to get depth so when injuries happen, your floor doesn't drop out. But I think that like defense, like edge, you've invested a lot in between Bosa and last year, the dude out of Georgia at 11, Williams. I think that both of those dudes you plan at having as your starting edge rushers. So I don't think you like draft a super high edge rusher necessarily. But besides that, like I think you could, and maybe linebacker, because your linebackers between Warner and Winters and Greenlaw, like those are 3 really good linebackers. And so I wouldn't draft linebacker either. But I think basically everywhere else, whether it's tackle or safety or corner, like I just think that there are tons of positions all over this team. But you hit all the good points there already.
Moving on to Seattle, our last team that we're going to talk about today, the Super Bowl champions. And this is actually a team that I see one glaring need for this team. Okay, and that to me is running back. So Kenneth Walker leaves in free agency and goes to Kansas City. Zach Charbonnet is good, but I think we have seen too many times in the NFL. You have two running backs who are really good. One of them is better and wants to get paid, and you let him go and you let him go get paid, and you're like, but it's okay because we've got this guy, who's just we think he's just as good. They were sort of a one A 1B to us, but he just doesn't have the production to warrant the money that this guy does, so we're letting him go, and it doesn't actually work out. And that's we see that a lot in the NFL. And so Charbonnet to me is the type of guy who needs there to be another running back to give them that 1-2 punch, to offset, to look different, right? So, I think that running back is a big need for them. I think that they could walk out with the last pick on Thursday night in Pittsburgh and take Jadarian Price out of Notre Dame. I think that would be a really solid pick. I don't think that would be an overdraft with how untalented at the running back position this draft really is. And I think that would be a good pick for them. I also look at defensive back. They have a great defense, probably the best defense in the NFC. That said, they lost some of those guys in free agency. There's some immaturity issues, and so they let some of those guys go despite winning a Super Bowl, right? So I think getting addressing corner opposite Devin Witherspoon, I don't think would be a bad thing. Right now what they have is their five, their top five DBs. If they're playing nickel: Devin Witherspoon, Ty Okada, Julian Love, Josh Jobe, Nick Eamon-Wari. I think they can get a little bit better. Witherspoon and Eamon-Wari are the ones that I'm like, I don't think you can get better than those. But at those other spots, they're and again, we talked about the depth at safety in this draft. Or maybe they decide to take the not Jermon McCoy, the other corner out of Tennessee that is getting mocked into the tail end of the first round. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's sort of what I'm seeing for Seattle, and maybe linebacker as well. Again, this is such a good roster as well. That obviously they won the Super Bowl last year, and they looked really good all the way through as they did it. And so I look at wide receiver. I think they have the best triple threat at wide receiver in the NFL with JSN, Cooper Kupp, and Rashid Shaheed. I think you would find better duos than JSN and Cooper Kupp, but I don't think you would find better trios once you put Shaheed in the mix as well, and you stack them up against the other teams in the NFL. They're set at quarterback with Darnold. Again, running back, get someone to be running back 2 behind Zach Charbonnet. Tight end AJ Barner, and we didn't really see Elijah Arroyo last year, but he coming out of Miami, there's a lot of buzz about him. So I feel good with them at tight end. Their offensive line was solid. So like running back is the only place that I'm like, go get a running back. If you can. If Jadarian Price is available at pick 32, go get him. And otherwise, if he's not, then there's still some free agent running backs out there. Maybe go sign Nick Chubb, or something like that. But yeah, that's how I view the Seattle Seahawks team right now.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You make a lot of great points as per usual, Jack. Jadarian Price, I think somebody you can easily mock to this team. I've seen him mocked to Seattle in the second round, and I think if you could get Jadarian Price at 64, I'd feel incredible if I was Seattle. I don't think that's happening. I think Jadarian Price is too good for that. But I think that you make a lot of good points. Running back, I think you need a starter. Right now, because Charbonnet messed up his knee, I don't think he's going to be ready for the season. And so I think that to just say Charbonnet, we're going to depend on him, that leaves Emmanuel Wilson, who I really like. But Emmanuel Wilson has always been a running back 2 or 3 in his career. And as a proud Emmanuel Wilson fantasy owner, I love me some Emmanuel Wilson. And please, don't bring anybody in. Just give him 300 carries. Please do that for me. But I think that if I was the Seattle Seahawks, I'd definitely invest in running back. this is not necessarily the draft to do it. So I think that you would want to earlier rather than later considering the draft. I think specifically guard to replace Anthony Bradford, because Anthony Bradford had some of the most ridiculous lowlights I've ever seen for an offensive guard in the league. And I just think that as long as you can replace him, I think that this can go from an above average offensive line to a really, really good offensive line by just replacing him at the guard spot. And so I think that that's a spot where, like, if you can get a running back and a guard who can both start in this draft, I think that this can be like a back-to-back sort of team. Like, I think that this team can immediately be in a really good position to be in the NFC Championship or in the Super Bowl again this next year. I think that DB, as you were saying, I think that because Rick Woolen and Kobe Bryant left this team, that those are two players that soaked up a pretty big number of snaps. Even though Rick Woolen was getting phased out last year, he's obviously a talented player. But that's just a lot of snaps that I don't think you want other DBs soaking up, considering how much you play nickel. And because this team relies so much on nickel, I don't think that you want to be forced out of the alignments that your defense is built for and that won you a Super Bowl. You want to play the way that won you a Super Bowl and do that all over again. And maybe shift things around a little bit to like keep things fresh so other teams can't like pick apart your defense. But I think that having the DBs available to do that, I also put edge just because like a depth edge rusher. I think DeMarcus Lawrence played incredibly well for his age, but he's very, very old. But I think that specifically like an edge 3 or 4 who can give you some juice off the edge, maybe who can defend the run a little bit. But I think that you can get that in the 3rd or 4th round potentially and get like a contributing edge rusher because you don't need a starter there. You don't even need a player who's going to play like big snaps year one. But I think to have a player to join that rotation would be valuable for this sort of team. And so I think that looking at it like running back, specifically that one guard spot, DB, like a perfect draft for Seattle would probably be running back in the 1st, guard in the 2nd, DB in the 3rd, edge in the 4th. If like you had good players there to pick from, like that's probably what I would do. And if I do that, like I feel like I don't have holes on this roster if I draft the right players there. Like that, I feel sets up Seattle in a great spot all over again. But Seattle's really good, man.
Yep. Yeah, the NFC West is insane. Like it really is. And it's one of those things that like Arizona is so bad, but it's like put Arizona last year in the NFC South. They probably win 8 games and they're competing for that division. But when you have to play the Rams and San Francisco and the Seahawks 2 times every year, like that's just tough to overcome. So, all right. Well, hey, next week we'll be hitting the rest of the NFC East and the NFC North. As we continue on the next few weeks leading up to the NFL draft in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and leading up to our NFL draft live stream that we're super excited to do again this year. It's going to be a good time. So make sure to be ready for that. As always, have a great week, and we will talk to you next time.